first of all, I'd like to thank all of you for attending this workshop. I'm very excited for you as your first time coaching youth sports. I know you all are going to do great, and hopefully this workshop will just give you a little bit more tips on how to make that experience more enjoyable for you and for your athletes. So we're going to start out with a demonstration, and I'm going to need one volunteer from all of you who has never played the guitar before. Okay, so go ahead and stand up. All right, here you go.
You just want me to play?
Well, first show me, sit down and show me how you think you would hold the guitar. Well, this chair is kind of hard to do it in. Take this chair. Show me how you think you'd sit down and hold the guitar.
I think like this.
All right, yeah, good.
Okay.
All right, now I want you to play me a C chord.
I don't think I know how to do that.
All right, that's okay. We're learning. It's your first time. So I'm just going to show you.
Okay.
I'm going to do it first, and I'm going to hand the guitar back to you so that you can do it, okay? Now watch closely. Might be a little out of tune. But anyways, all right, there you go. Now it's your turn. Oops. Close. All right, so now I'm going to give you a little bit more instruction. I know It's kind of hard to watch me do it and then be expected to do it right away. So you're going to take your index finger, and you're going to put it on the first fret of the B string. Do you know what that means?
No.
Okay, so the B string is the second string from the bottom.
Okay.
So that string, do you know what the first fret is?
Is it the first line here?
Yes.
Okay.
And you're going to place it right
there.
Right there.
Okay.
All right. Place it a little bit more on top of there. Okay. On the second string though.
Okay.
All right, now you're going to take your middle finger and you're going to place it on the second fret of the
This one?
Yes. And now you're going to place your ring finger.
Okay.
And you're going to place it on, right
there.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, now strum it.
Not quite.
Close. Well, you're getting there. We'll revisit that next time.
Okay.
So, thank you for volunteering. As you can see, it was a little challenging. Even me, as the coach, I was struggling a little bit to kind of put myself in Maeve's perspective of playing. You know, it's easy for me when I pick up the guitar and I sit down, it's almost like muscle memory for me, but I'm the one that has the knowledge. So as first-time youth sport coaches, most of you, if not all of you, have played the sport that you're going to be coaching. And so you have those basic fundamental skills. They're almost like they come natural to you. But when you're going to be teaching these young kids something like a skill, like playing the guitar, playing a C chord, which to most guitarists is like, you know, they memorize it automatically, it would be easy for you, but for your athletes, it's going to be challenging because it's their first time ever. In this case, picking up the guitar. In other sports, dribbling the ball. Yeah. So what we call that is actually the cognitive phase of motor skill learning. And so essentially what that means is that when you're first learning a new skill, like playing a C chord on the guitar, it's going to be very choppy and full of mistakes. Your movements are going to be very deliberate. Like, you know, if you notice when Maeve was strumming, it was almost like, you know, like, come on, strum it, you know, like she really desired to hear it and to get it right. And so as the coach, it's harder than you would think. You know, it's frustrating as a coach because you're like, oh, this is so easy for me, why isn't it easy for my athlete? And so, as you can see, I was even struggling a little bit to remember, okay, like, what string do I tell her to put what finger, you know? And on top of that, like, the guitar was a little bit out of tune and all that stuff. And so, you know, in a sport, you get these kids coming. Some kids might show up to practice without the correct equipment and gear, and so they can't even practice in the first place because they're not even wearing their cleats or the correct footwear. And then on top of that, they don't even know where to start, you know? And so just like the guitar, where, you know, she knew how to sit down with it, which was good. You're gonna have most kids, they show up, they at least know, like, it's a soccer ball, I kick it with my foot, you know, they know that much. But from there, she didn't know. And even after I demonstrated, she still had trouble remembering. You know, these kids, they aren't gonna be able to, like, memorize what you just showed them exactly. And so that is the cognitive phase of motor skill learning. And for most of you, throughout the time that you're coaching these kids, they're going to be in the cognitive phase. It's not until they get into high school and they pursue the sport further that they get into what we call the associative phase, which we're not going to touch on today, but that's essentially when they're able to start doing things on their own without even really thinking about it. And so, as a coach in the cognitive phase, there's certain things that you'll want to remember. And so, one of these things is that you must have clear communication. And not only that, but you have to break down the language for them. So like Maeve, for example, having never played the guitar before, she didn't know what the B string was, which is perfectly fine. Why would we expect her to know what the B string was if this was the first time she was playing the guitar? I even still have to think about what's B string, you know? And so you can't, you know, get your athlete out there. And, you know, if you are, you know, like a gymnastics coach and, you know, I mean, I guess youth, they start with like tumbling and less serious moves. But, you know, you can't just expect them to know what a round-off is right away if they don't know what that language means. Or in basketball, they might not even know what a layup is. You know, they don't know that terminology yet, and so you have to break it down into simpler knowledge for them. So for Maeve, I had to tell her second string from the bottom. She knows what string is, she knows what bottom means, you know, so she can kind of put two and two together. And next, you also want to make sure that that you demonstrate for them. But like I said, the demonstration, they're not always going to be able to replicate what you just did. So when you demonstrate, part of demonstration is like I had to go over to Maeve and actually move her fingers onto the correct string for her. And so if you have an athlete, like, you know, in basketball, for example, and they're shooting a free throw, if they don't know where to place their hands on the ball, you might be telling them where to place it, but you might actually have to go over and ask their permission to move their hands for them on the ball in the correct placement. And that's okay. A lot of kids want you to do that. They'd rather you show them and completely help them than them do it wrong. And next, it's important that the kids learn by doing it. And so, as great as it is that I showed Maeve where to stick her fingers on the guitar, I have to make sure that eventually she can do it on her own. I just have to let her keep practicing, making those mistakes, doing it over and over again until she eventually gets it. Because me doing it for her every time isn't going to help her learn. And then, finally, you might need to use what's called blocked practice. And essentially what that means is that instead of teaching them everything at once and then sending them off to do it, you break it down for them and you practice each part separately, and then you eventually put them all together. And so with the guitar example, I might first just have her practice holding the guitar and maybe strumming without even putting her fingers on the frets. And after she's done strumming, I might say, okay, now we're just going to practice putting your fingers on the frets. No strumming, just moving your fingers. Then eventually the goal is at the end we'd put it all together and she would know how to do it. And so in a sport, again, in basketball, you might have to practice just dribbling first. No shooting, you know, no fancy moves, no passing, just dribbling. Then you might have them just pass the ball to each other, you know, and then you eventually put it all together. And there's different ways to do this, different combinations that you could do. I'm not going to go over those tonight, but it's definitely something to think about instead of just teaching them everything at once. They're kids, so their memory capacity and their attention span is not super long, and so you're going to have to break things down for them. So now I'd like to ask you all, as first-time youth sport coaches, in your specific sport that you're going to be coaching, what do you think are some skills that you're going to be teaching your kids that they're going to struggle with at first, that you're going to literally have to break down piece by piece?
I coach volleyball, so just
Okay.
bumping the ball and like hand placement, like do
Yeah.
I go like just this, or do I go like this, or what do I do with my thumbs? Like they're just kind of like sitting there. So like as a kid, you wouldn't really know what to do with your hands, and you just kind of gotta like guide their hand placement and just practice that
Right.
motion.
Yeah, that's a really great example. And, you know, they're probably going to complain that it hurts at first too.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to have to explain to them, well, you know, it's going to hurt at first. Your hands aren't used to hitting the ball like that.
You know, with their arms and their forearms. And just,
Yeah. Yeah, very great example. Anyone else?
I coach hurdles in track and field, so kind of knowing which foot goes over the hurdle first, or how many steps in between the hurdles, or even how to get over a hurdle can be challenging. So
Yeah,
that would take a lot of practice.
it's very true. And so how do you think you would break that down?
Probably since you go over multiple hurdles in one race, so maybe just practicing over one single hurdle and breaking down the whole movement rather
Yeah.
than doing all of them at once.
It's a really good example.
So I coach football, and you know, a lot of football. There's a lot of terminology, and you know, for different positions.
Where's this
and
voice coming from?
yeah, the man behind the video camera. So, and there's so it can get very complex. So I would think with these young peewee kids that I really need to, even though it's not football terminology, probably use terms like go left and go right.
Right.
And maybe get into the, I'm just kind of thinking about it out loud, maybe get into the, worry about the names, the complex names of play calling and some of the formations later.
Yeah.
Like make sure they just really understand what a 3-point stance is, or what a, you know, you get what I'm saying. Like
Yeah.
the basics before I worry about the minutia of the details.
Exactly, because a lot of times in youth sport, you know, you're not going to be able to have all these fancy plays. You know, you watch a youth soccer game and they're not, you know, they're not doing all of these fancy movements yet. They can't do, you know, like scissors, and, you know, they can't do, in basketball, they're not going to be dribbling between their legs at first. I mean, some of them might, you know, the prodigies, but most of them aren't going to be, and that's okay, because, you know, they're never going to make a shot if they're worried about things that they are not capable of doing at that age, you know. And so that's okay. So that's a really great way to put it, is, you know, you just need to work on those fundamentals, the stances that they should be in, and communication between each other. You know, say, you know, I'm open, you know, pass the ball, you know, getting that communication with each other, getting to know each other. Because with youth sport, it's so much more than winning the game. It's even so much more than mastering the skill. It's these values that you're building in these kids at a young age. You know, what it teaches them about life. You know, they're in school, teaching them just hard work and perseverance and all those things. It's way more important than, you know, teaching them to do fancy movements. So that kind of leads into the next thing that we're going to talk about, and that is the importance of reinforcement while coaching youth sports. And so I'm going to give a brief overview first of operant conditioning and what the difference between reinforcement and punishment is, and then I'm going to kind of go into, you know, when you should use each, when it's appropriate. And so essentially operant conditioning is saying that when a behavior is reinforced, the behavior will increase, and when a behavior is punished, then the behavior will decrease. And another way to look at this that I think is really good to explain to kids is, if A occurs, or if A happens and B reinforces or punishes it, then C will happen. So they know, you know, you start teaching the kids at a young age, like, you you pay attention and you focus to me while I'm teaching you something, then, you know, after practice there'll be snacks, you know, or if you don't pay attention to me and you goof off, then you'll have to run a lap after practice, you know. And so, but it's very tricky with kids at a young age to know which type of reinforcers and which punishers, if any punishment at all, is appropriate. And so, what do you all think of, do you think that reinforcement or punishment is more effective in youth sport coaching?
I'd say reinforcement.
And why is that?
Because with reinforcements, you're giving rewards.
Mm-hmm.
So in that instance, the children that we're coaching are going to want to do what we reward them with more than if we punish them. It's a shame aspect with it. So they're operating more on fear than on motivation.
Exactly. That is very true. I mean, these are young kids, and you know, similar to what Matt was saying, is we don't want them to feel shameful for what they're doing. They're at a key point in their development to where we should not expect them to do these extreme things. You know, if they don't succeed, that's the point at their age, is to learn from their mistakes. And especially because they're in the cognitive phase, like we just talked about, is like they're not gonna master their skills. They're not expected to be perfect. It's all about learning. So if you punish them for everything they did wrong, you punish them all the time because they're gonna constantly be making mistakes. Whereas when you're older and you're a Division I basketball player, like, you know, if they do something silly, like travel with the ball in basketball at the collegiate level, well, then that's almost reason for the coach to sit them out or something, because they know better, because they're more elite than these youth players. And so again, the goal for them is learning, not perfection. But punishment, however, is sometimes necessary if the kids keep thinking that they can get away with their misbehavior. So if you didn't have any punishment at all, you'd probably have a bunch of crazy kids running around all the time. You wouldn't be able to control them. So can you all give me an example of an instance where you think punishment would be appropriate during a practice that you all might face?
If a kid, I'm sorry, go ahead. You might be about to say the same thing I was going to say. If there's a kid that's picking on one of the other players, I'm coaching baseball in this scenario. If somebody's picking on another player because they can't hit the ball no matter what they do,
Yeah.
even if we're just playing t-ball, let's say they keep just knocking the tee over and this other player is really good at hitting it, and they start to make fun of this kid because, you know, they don't know any better at their age, then you need to discourage that so that it doesn't beat down this other kid that we're trying to encourage, like you said, and pick up as they learn the sport.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if another kid is like getting on another kid for not doing something right, like, and yelling at them and making fun of their mistakes, like, that is not good at this age, and we all know that. And part of teaching youth sports is teaching them fundamental values, including respect towards you as a coach, respect towards their teammates. And so just like Nick said, that would be an appropriate time for punishment. But even then, you would not want to punish them in a severe way. Similar to, you know, methods of punishing your kids, no actual physical punishment like spanking or anything like that obviously is not the way to go. But using something that maybe in a way would be productive for them, like running a lap around the field, something like that. Something that's not going to put them in embarrassment in front of the other kids, but that's going to hopefully teach them a lesson. Or taking things away, so that idea of negative punishment, of taking away something, like taking away their snack at the end of practice, you know. And so, again, the goal is not for children to perfect the skill or the sport, so you must reinforce them for gradual improvement. And so this is what we call in psychology as shaping. And so it's the idea of gradually requiring more and more improvement of the skills before you reinforce them. So, for example, if you're teaching a youth basketball player how to shoot a layup, you would first reinforce them for literally just dribbling in the correct hand. So if they're doing a right-handed layup, you might reinforce them just for dribbling the ball in their right hand first, you know? And that reinforcement could simply just be praise. Praise is a really good reinforcement. You're not gonna be handing kids candy while you're playing practice all the time. So praising is the most basic form of positive reinforcement for these kids. And again, positive reinforcement is when you're adding something that's going to increase their behavior, and negative reinforcement would be when you're taking something away that they don't like, that's also going to increase their behavior. And then after you realize that they know how to dribble it in the correct hand, you then would not reinforce them again until they do something that's more and more closer to the end goal of shooting the layup. So they're dribbling the ball, and then you see that they get up towards the basket and they leap off of the correct foot to go up, and you praise them for that. And then if they don't go off the correct foot, well, then you would say, like, no, start over. That's a really great way of, like, punishment is start over. You can't move on to the next part of the drill until you do that, you know? And that's going to be enough for the kid just to get frustrated and be like, I just want to get this right, you know? So they're going to dribble the ball, they're dribbling in the right hand, they leap off the correct foot, and they go to shoot it. And you notice that they shoot the ball, like, perfectly off of the square on the backboard. Reinforce them, you know, all of these little gradual things. And even if they don't, you know, praise them just for the fact that they knew to dribble it in their right hand and leap off of their left foot to go towards the layup. So that's shaping. Gradually reinforcing them as they get closer and closer to the desired behavior. And like I said, they're kids, so the ABC model is a perfect thing to keep reminding them. Tell them if A happens and you respond with B, then C will occur. You know, if you goof off, or if I tell you to do something and you don't listen, then you're going to have to run a lap, you know, things like that. And that's not to say that running a lap is the best punishment, but that's just an example. And so I want to ask you all, in your scenarios of your sport that you're coaching, what do you think are some effective reinforcers or punishment, if that is appropriate, that you could use during your sport?
I think of kids in youth football, and first thing that comes to my mind is tackling. So, you know, reinforcing, you know, really big positive reinforcement for keeping their head up.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I guess punishment in this context where, you know, if they do dip their head, they could really hurt themselves. So, you know, letting them know that was improper, maybe make them even sit out the next play and watch somebody do it properly and put them back in, or something along those lines.
Yeah. And I love that example of a punishment because it's productive. You know, you're sitting them out so that they still get to observe and watch and learn from other kids. You know, you're not kicking them out of the game entirely. They're just taking a breather and watching and learning from that way. So that's a great example, Grant. Anyone else?
So I'm thinking in baseball, when I'm teaching my children, I want them as fielders to keep the ball in front of them. That's a grounder. And if I tell them enough times to do it and they don't, a punishment that I might do is say, do a lap around the bases. It's a productive one where I'm not forcing them to give 100%, but it's also teaching them how the sport is done and to become comfortable with the bases. Yeah, that's a wonderful example, Matt. Because it's keeping them focused. It's not an irrelevant punishment. It's keeping them doing something baseball related, but most kids, you know, aren't going to want to stop what they're doing to run around. They might. You're going to get those kids that like to run. That was always me when I was playing sports, is like they would use the punishment as doing a lap, and I'm like, well, I like running, so this isn't punishment. But for most kids, they're not going to want to run. So that's a really, really great example and a really key component, a basic fundamental skill of youth baseball, of keeping the ball in front of you. Because they're not going to be perfect. They're not going to always get the ground balls. They're not always going to be able to throw it to the correct base on time. But the simple being able to, like, not have the ball go past them every time is key at that age. All right, so y'all gave some really, really good examples on those. Some examples of when it wouldn't be appropriate is if you're not giving reinforcement frequently enough. So if you're only giving them treats after practice, but during practice you're not telling them what they did well, you're not praising them for what they're doing right, well, yeah, you're giving them snacks for a good practice, but they don't know what they actually did right. So it has to be more constant reinforcement throughout the practice at this age.
And then some bad punishment would obviously be too harsh of punishment. You know, my coach liked to do this thing where we would be on teams, and soccer coach, during youth soccer, where we'd be on teams and we'd have to shoot the ball, and the team who had the most misses had to go and stick their butts out in front of the goal, and the other team would kick the ball, like, and try to, like, kick them in the butt, no joke. And that scared me. Like, I hated that. But I mean, it worked because I didn't want to be the team that lost, because you literally had to bend down and hope that someone didn't kick the ball at your butt. I mean, all things considered, it didn't really hurt that bad. So I wouldn't go as far to say that it was like abuse, but still, was that the most effective way? Probably not. It was kind of embarrassing, and it had the potential to be painful. And so the final thing that we're going to talk about that I think sums up youth sports in one of the best ways is being task-oriented with the kids. In other words, not focusing on winning, but focusing on the journey of learning and becoming better and better. And so I'm going to give a quote by John Wooden, who is one of the most inspirational people that I have heard of and listened to in sports. He was a UCLA basketball coach for many years. In a 12-year span, he won 10 national championships with his team, and the other 2 years, they went to at least the Final Four. So he was a very, very successful coach. But the interesting thing was he did not focus on winning. He actually thought the opposite. He thought that success does not equal winning, and that it's more about the journey than the end. And so he has a quote where he said, "Success comes from knowing that you did your best to become the best that you are capable of becoming." And I think that sums up youth sports very well, because you want these kids to know that they did the best that they're going to be able to do at 5 years old. You know, so what are they capable at 5 years old? You know, they're not capable of, you know, shooting the soccer ball perfectly into the back corner of the goal every time. They're not capable of making three-point shots like 50% of the time in basketball. They're not capable of, you know, pitching a strike every time they go up there. You know, they're not. They're 5 years old or 6 years old or 7 years old. But what are they capable of, and are they doing their best to become the best that they're capable of? And so, I mean, what do you all think about this quote? Do you think John Wooden's approach of not focusing on winning, but focusing on the journey, and also just, you know, because telling a kid to do their best is pretty cliche, you know? Just do your best. You hear that all the time, but what does that really mean? So what do you all think of that quote?
I love it. I love John Wooden. It's amazing. Like, it's not about winning for these kids per se, but it's more about, like, do I feel good coming out of it? And if you feel good coming out of it, like, that's a win, like, for you. And he was a coach, so, like.
Exactly. Yeah, and are they having fun?
So, I was coaching baseball, but I actually did coach track and field for a year, and I was a runner, and that's definitely a sport where it's very difficult, and the practices are difficult, the meets are difficult.
Yeah.
And for me, the biggest thing was always coming out at the end of each season improving and getting better than you were before.
Yeah.
And that was even more rewarding as a coach, to see the kids improving and to see their reaction when you told them how much they'd improved. So that's definitely one sport probably where more so than others, that's what it's clearly about that. But the same thing in baseball too, as a baseball player, and I always loved when my coaches would, you know, at the end of the season we'd have like our banquet and they'd talk about all the players, and there were a few times that the coach had told me how much better I did than he expected me to do, and that was always really, that really helped me.
It's very
keep
encouraging.
going and keep playing year after year.
Yeah. Very good answers. And so, with your track and field example, I assume that the improvement would be shaving off seconds off their time, you know? Or is that one way to look at it, I guess?
Yeah, that's one way to look at it, yeah.
You know, or maybe improving their form. Maybe they always like flailed their arms while they ran, and by the end of the season, they're getting a better stride.
We even had a runner that couldn't make it through a practice without having to walk.
Yes.
For part of a run.
In youth
by the
sports,
end of the
that's
year,
a great example. Yeah. Very, very good. Yeah, you can't expect these kids to be able to do as much as you would be able to do. Yeah, and I love the baseball example too of, you know, at the end of that season at the banquet, you know, these kids love when they can hear that their coach knows that they improved. And so along with that, so task-oriented coaching style. Essentially what that looks like is that you're focusing on the children improving in sports relative to their own individual performances. So you're not looking at comparing them to the other teams. You're looking at have they improved based on their own relative, or based on their individual performances. And so like Nick said, at the end of the season you're not looking at, oh my gosh, I'm so proud of you all because you came in first in the division. You're looking at, wow, I'm so proud of you because based on where you were at the beginning of the season, you as an individual have improved so much. And so task-oriented is the opposite of outcome-oriented, which is what you're not going to want to do with these kids. And outcome-oriented would be you're focusing on, okay, kids, we're winning this game. That's what matters, win this game. And so along with that, basically everything that we've been talking goes with task-oriented style. First being praise them for small achievements, even if they don't beat the opponents, because they're going to win some, they're going to lose some. In youth sports, it is very likely that you're going to have a team that's way better than all the other teams. So you could be the coach of a team that just demolishes every team. I played on a softball team where one year we literally won every single game because we were the only team that had a pitcher that could actually pitch the ball straight down the middle. You're going to find that in youth sport. You're going to have volleyball teams where you're the only team where you can actually get your serves over the net. So you might be a part of a team that wins with no problem, but even at that point, you're still not going to want to be only highlighting the fact that you're winning. You're going to want to highlight, yeah, I'm so proud of you all for winning your division, but let's look at what each of you did. How can you become even better? And so this leads to a stronger work ethic, which in return will lead to the most optimal performances. So that's what John Wooden found. It was, I don't know if ironic is the right word, but it was almost paradoxical because it was like he wasn't focusing on winning, but because he wasn't focusing on winning, they won. Because he was focusing on the journey and everything they were doing, living in the moment with these players, they ended up winning, which is just fascinating. And so emphasizing to the children that they have more control over their achievements rather than their opponents. We can't control how the opponents play, but we can control how we play. So you tell these kids, you say, I don't know what your opponents are going to look like today. I don't know how fast they can run. I don't know how good they are at shooting the ball, but I do know what you're capable of. And so hopefully this will make it easier for the children to feel good about themselves, and it will show that they're developing higher competence in everything that they're doing. So, with everything we've been talking about today, we've been talking about the coach's responsibilities during the cognitive phase of motor learning. So can any of you remind me what some of the key things about coaching during the cognitive phase are? What do you have to have when kids are learning these basic skills and they're making lots of mistakes?
Reinforcement.
Reinforcement, yes, exactly. You have to reinforce them for what they're doing well. If I'm teaching kids a skill, how should I teach them?
Teach it to them in their own words that they can understand.
Yes. So can you give me a quick example of that we might have already used, or a new one?
With the guitar example that you were using, you said strum the B string, but Maeve didn't know where it was, so you took your hand and showed her where it is.
Exactly.
Show them how to do it.
And disclaimer, I think I actually ended up moving her fingers to the wrong position actually when I think about it, and the guitar was out of tune. But that's going to happen as a coach. So you're going to realize you showed up to practice and you forgot the soccer ball pump. And so these kids are coming to you and they're like, my ball is flat. And you're like, oh shoot, you forgot the pump. What are you supposed to do in that point? Well, I guess they're going to, they're not each going to have their own ball. But you're going to come and you're going to realize you forgot, your notes. You forgot the plays that you were supposed to teach them. And you're going to have to improv on the spot. Just like I did. I'm like, shoot, I'm going to have to take this guitar and pick it back up myself because I don't remember what I was going to tell her, because it's really hard to teach it from the outside in sometimes, once we've already mastered it. So really good point. Break down the language. Yeah. And then we talked about reinforcement, like you said, it's a key component. We talked about how in most cases reinforcement is more effective than punishment, but do you remember the time that we said punishment probably might have to be used?
Like the bullying instance that he talked about earlier.
Yes, if kids are being bullied or kids are misbehaving, and you're probably going to have some of those panic moments where you're like, I don't know what to do. So-and-so is literally like took off his shirt and has it flying around, or so-and-so is like hitting the other kid and this other kid is just sitting over in the corner not doing anything. You're going to have these kind of like panic moments, and you're going to have to remember, okay, like how can I reinforce, how can I get them to reorient themselves? And it might literally just be taking a break and playing a game with them, because again, they're kids, their attention spans aren't the longest, their memory's not the best when you're teaching them things. And then finally we talked about the importance of being task-oriented as an athlete and a coach. And so can anyone remind me what that mindset looks like as being task-oriented?
Work on the process, the day-to-day tasks, and
yes,
and instead of winning or the trophy, so to speak.
Yes, exactly. Just like John Wooden said, you need to focus on enjoying the journey of coaching. Have the kids enjoy the journey of learning these skills rather than focusing on the end goal or the end. You're going to have goals, but rather than focusing on the end, whether winning, focus on the journey, not winning. And so I'm going to end finally with another John Wooden quote that I think is something that you're going to constantly have to be reminding yourself, because as a coach, there's going to be a lot of mistakes. There's going to be a lot of outcomes that you don't like. You might lose. You might have parents yelling at you because, you're not winning, or their kid isn't getting playing time. You yourselves might be parents, and you're going to have to balance how do I make sure that people don't think I'm just sticking my kid in over theirs, But throughout all of this, you have to find the joy in it. And John Wooden puts it best when he says, quote, "Things turn out best for the people who make the best of the way things turn out." Things might not turn out how you expected. You might not win the game. You might have kids that are screaming. You might have a kid playing goalie that cries after the ball goes in. I think I did that once when I was playing goalie. You might have kids that get injured. But what do you do to make the best out of this? You pick them up. You tell them what they're doing good. You tell them, it's okay. I want you to have fun out there. I want you to learn. I want you to grow. I want you to have fun with your friends. Because success comes from knowing that you did your best to become the best that you are capable of becoming. So once again, I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I wish you the best as you are first-time youth sport coaches. And if you ever need any help, you can most certainly contact me or reach out to any of my fellow colleagues.
There you go.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.